Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Which Apps Make Sense on Which Cloud? Today's event is brought to you by Nutanix and produced by Actual Tech Media. We've got a fun event, a great educational event lined up for you today. Before I introduce you to today's expert presenters, just a few things that you should be aware of about this event. First off, my name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator on today's special webinar. There's a few things that you should know. First off, we want this to be educational. So there's the questions tab on the left-hand side of your audience console, and I can call your attention to that there. That's where we encourage your questions about today's topic, which apps on which cloud, and we'll be doing our best to answer those throughout the event, but we'll be queuing up the best questions for our dedicated Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. We also have a number of handouts in the Handouts tab. You can see links there to building a cloud smart strategy for your applications, part 1, part 2, the Nutanix test drive. We'll be talking more about that later in the event, the private and hybrid cloud reference architectures, and then what's driving where you run your IT applications and services. So make sure that you check out all those links. They'll be there for you throughout the today's webinar. And then finally, we'll be announcing the winner of a Tango $300 gift card at the end of today's presentation. Tango gift cards can be exchanged for valuable gift cards at all sorts of places, your choice of hundreds of retailers, including Walmart, Best Buy, and many restaurants. So it's kind of the universal gift card. If you're watching this event on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the Handouts tab. And without further delay, I'm excited to introduce you to today's expert presenters. They are Mr. Sachin Cheda, who is a Senior Director of Customer Advocacy at Nutanix, Mr. Alan Waters, Senior Solutions Marketing Manager at Nutanix, and finally, Mr. Pat Heinrich, Senior Manager of Customer Success at Nutanix. Sachin, Alan, and Pat, thank you so much for being on the event today. I will hand it first over to Sachin. Take it away, Sachin.
Thank you, David, and welcome everyone to this webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about the concept of aligning applications to various clouds. We'll start off with a quick discussion of the actual flow for today. So we'll start off with a quick discussion on the various applications and workloads. Now, this information is really intended to kind of help you associate with the topic and understand where we're trying to go from the applications perspective. So Pat and I will walk through those different applications, and then we'll also uncover some of the attributes associated with that. These are various different characteristics associated with the different workloads. Next up, we'll have Alan and myself walk through various different cloud choices, including private cloud, public cloud, hybrid cloud, etc. And then Alan will continue on talking a little bit about the concept of building a cloud smart strategy with Nutanix, and we'll finally end with question and answers. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to enter them in the window. We'll try our best to answer them real time, but we'll also have dedicated time at the end of this session. So let me start off by quickly talking about these application and workloads and bring Pat into the conversation here. So Pat, I know you're a veteran of IT. You've been in the industry, a couple decades, and a wide range of industries like chemical, etc., dealing with IT. What has changed? Has the world of cloud made IT redundant? How have the applications evolved?
Yeah. So thank you. Thanks, Sachin. And thank you for sharing my age, even though I'm not shared on video here. No, so seriously, a lot has changed. Cloud has made, as many people may have assumed years ago, thinking that cloud would make IT groups in organizations less relevant. We're finding that they're more relevant than ever for a couple of reasons. One of them is because the business apps that IT is supporting, that IT is maintaining uptime around, are more essential than ever to the business. And then number of services that one may not consider to be apps, like as we have here, end user computing, robo and edge computing, and so forth, again, are becoming more and more business critical to the point where the business stops if these services stop. So that makes IT a more critical function in the business today than it did in the pre-cloud world.
Great. So let's just walk through kind of a list of the applications themselves, right? So it's not uncommon to see workloads like databases in pretty much every organization, along with business critical applications. But there are some emerging set of workloads that we're seeing here, right, Pat? So can you talk a little bit about kind of the evolution of these applications and like development of like big data and cloud native workloads?
Sure. So, with I guess as IT has become more important, we're finding that organizations have more data, are able to collect more data as things like automation, as things like logistics, as things like supply chain management and so forth in organizations. As we build more applications around these, we collect data not only on what we're doing, but what we predict we're doing as well. And so with that additional data, we're seeing organizations ask questions like, where do I put that data? How do I make that data accessible? And how do I do analytics around that data in order to develop new insights that go beyond what my traditional applications have been telling me? So again, we're seeing more and more of that, and we're seeing that that accelerate. It hasn't just gone up in a step change, but it continues to accelerate year after year.
Indeed. And then the recent situation that we've seen with the pandemic has also resulted in an explosion of end user computing as a workload as well. So people are talking quite feverishly on working remotely and having access to applications. And what better way to do that than looking at options like VDI or desktop as a service? So again, the purpose of this slide is really to help you kind of engage and understand what are the applications that people are encountering and dealing with. Now, everyone has their own set of applications, but what I would like to actually talk through next, and this is actually a good, important slide, so I'd recommend that you go back and also download the presentation and read some of the links that to blogs that we have here are the attributes, right? So now that you have these applications and you build out this whole catalog of things that you can or services that you have, there's a need to actually characterize these, and that's where these attributes come into play. So to understand what's the different functions, et cetera, on that front, what is the type of application that we're dealing with, what are some of the requirements like performance or capacity requirements, et cetera. So Pat, bring you back into this conversation. Let's just focus on maybe 2 or 3 of these. Could you walk through like your point of view on attributes? Why are they important? And also just maybe touch on a few and what the consideration should be when you're looking at them?
Yeah, sure. So if we go forward from where to the third one, utilization and growth. If I'm looking at where I'm going to run a particular application, I certainly want to know how much data is that application going to create. I certainly want to know how it's going to be utilized. And this depends on the organization as well. If I am an accounting firm, maybe there's a huge seasonality uptick on and about April 15th in the US, tax time for individual people's income taxes. If I'm a retailer, maybe there's a huge seasonality that I need to account for around the holidays and so forth. So I really want to know that so that I can know what clouds are appropriate for the level of utilization and the level of growth that I expect. I'll skip down to security, regulatory compliance. A lot of these are simply not negotiable. So when we talk about a cloud provider and we talk about an application, we have very specific needs that we can match up, needs for the application, for data, protection, and the available services around a particular cloud. That one's probably one of the most black and white. Either the cloud service meets those needs that your security team that you've determined you need for your data or application, or they haven't. So those are a couple
Indeed.
of them.
So
Mhm.
Yeah. And so, Pat, what you're saying is you can use these attributes to decide where an application runs, right? Is that the takeaway for the audience here?
Exactly. So if we think about security and regulatory as a black and white one, that's maybe, like I said, one of the easiest to think about, but it's not the only one to think about. So if we look at this list and think about each of these, think about how our applications, what we think about each of our specific applications around these attributes and what the application requires for function and type, performance, capacity needs, and so forth, we start to build out a map that helps tell us what resources we need in a cloud to be able to deliver this application to our business.
Indeed, indeed. And so, Pat, one of the things that you and I do as a part of our function is we meet with customers and we kind of help them from an enterprise architecture perspective. And one of the best practices that I wanted to share here, and I'd like to get your thoughts afterwards, is that it's important to not only understand what applications you're running, but also capturing these attributes and doing so in a catalog form so that IT, from an infrastructure perspective, the folks are aware of the applications and the various attributes, so it makes it a lot easier for them to classify that. Is that something that you do too?
Uh, Absolutely. I like to think of it as you have to look at the complexity. You have to look at the applications and how what their needs are around each of these attributes. And when you do that, it actually, when you find common pieces or commonalities between applications, allows you to simplify what your cloud needs are by finding commonalities between those applications. So we look at complexity, but if we're looking at complexity, we're doing that to get ourselves to simplicity around how we move to the cloud, where we move our services from a cloud perspective.
Okay, great. Now, one thing that I also recommend that everyone do this, and this could be the infrastructure team, it could be the application team, it could be the combination of the two, is look at also how to handle not only the applications, but also whether it's important for them to keep them in-house, looking at outsourcing them, or even looking at retiring them. This is one of those strategies that we talk about in our blogs that are linked in the actual resources section here. But there's an article that I'd like to point out. This is an article from our Next magazine by a gentleman named Neil Nicolaisen, who is the CTO CIO at a company called OC Tanner in the western half of the US. And what he writes about in this article is that there is an important function that IT has to play in terms of helping the business decide how to handle these applications. And what he recommends is evaluating applications in two major axes. One is the market differentiation function of an application or an IT service. And then the second one is the mission criticality of that IT application or service. And based on that, again, he's offering up this matrix here saying that if an application ranks low on the criticality and the differentiation, maybe it's a candidate to be retired or outsourced altogether, right? It really doesn't matter because, again, it's not a critical function, nor does it provide any differentiation to the business or the organization. However, if a function is lower on the mission criticality but higher on the partnering side, and the differentiation side, then this is an opportunity for IT and the business to partner with an external provider to deliver this, right? An example of this could be like digital marketing, where it is not critical, for certain functions to actually have a digital marketing presence, but it could be a great way to differentiate yourself in augmenting how you collect information and leads and nurture and your customers, et cetera. And that may be a great opportunity to partner with a firm like Marketo or Eloqua or Oracle, et cetera, right? To basically build out and get that functionality versus building it in-house. Now, the other two options, again, if it's high on the criticality but low on the differentiation side, i.e. if the service is not available, and that it can cause an impact on the business, that's when you aim for parity, right? And aiming for parity in this case means making sure that it is running, but you're not necessarily investing in innovation, right? It's basically keeping the lights on. And that's where you want to basically have the infrastructure running as is. Now, these are workloads that are somewhat problematic because it's not easy to modernize them, right? You pretty much have to adopt a lift and shift re-platform strategy versus a rewrite strategy, because these are, again, workloads that you have to keep running, but they offer no value. So you're pretty much, you want to extract as much value from that as possible, right? And then the last one is the one grouping where it's high on the criticality list and high on the differentiation list. And this is where you really want to invest in these workloads, right? This is where you would want to invest in database as a service type approach to basically accelerate the actual time to develop it. This is where you would invest in DevOps, etc. This is also where you would look at, the diversity of various different cloud options in that sense. So again, the reason for this slide is to, again, give you a framework to help you make decisions on how to treat various applications. And again, there's an article that goes into more detail in our next magazine on that front. So Pat, let me bring you back in here. So let's just walk through one example. What you see here on the screen is basically a table which shows all the attributes on the left-hand side, and then up top on the row, we actually have various different application types. So why don't we walk through an example here, if you can, talking about the actual attributes itself.
Yeah, sure, thanks. So on that previous slide, we had a framework, and I love frameworks like that, and it had two dimensions, had market differentiation and mission criticality of an application or service. But as I mentioned before, complexity, applications and the services that IT is expected to deliver are complex. So there's more than two dimensions that we need to consider when we're thinking about where's the best place, what's the best cloud for my particular application or service. So what we recommend, or what we do oftentimes with customers, is think about the important attributes of a particular application. We've got those on the left: application, function, criticality, and so forth. And then we would start building out columns like that one, transactional 2/3 tier apps. Working with a specific customer, that might be a specific app. It might be a specific database service. It might be something like that. And we go through and ask ourselves the questions: what is the application function? What is it doing? What business need is that application or service meeting? Is it ERP, CRM, like we see in examples here on the slide? What's the criticality of it? Is it something that the business can live without for a time? Is it something that the business has to have, or business stops? Very similar to business impact analysis. If we're asking ourselves where we want to run it, wherever we run it has to support that level of criticality. Life cycle and packaging. How do we maintain this? How do we apply patches to it? How do we update it or upgrade it? All of those things play into, well, if we move it to this place and run it here, how easy or difficult is it going to be to do those maintenance type activities? Then, as we touched on previously, performance and capacity utilization and growth. Is this something that isn't going to grow a lot, isn't going to produce a lot of data, isn't going to be hit a lot by many users from around the world? Or is it the opposite of that? And can the place where we're running it, whether it be in our own data center, somewhere else and so forth, will it support those type of needs? So come seasonality time, come holidays, come an audit, and so forth, are we going to find that we aren't able to get the capacity? We're not able to grow like we need to? Do we not have the performance we need to meet those needs, which may not be here now, but may be there in the future? And then, of course, cost, which is the great equalizer here. Of course, how much does it cost? And that's a huge consideration. And then, as we said before, security, regulatory, and compliance. That's, like I said, it's pretty black and white around what you need and what a cloud or other service can deliver to meet those needs. And then finally, what are the skills needed? If I run my applications here, does my team already know how to support that? Is there a huge learning curve there? Or is it similar to what I'm already doing? Big consideration that sometimes isn't thought of initially when one looks at this. And so, just in summary here, if I was doing this with the customer organization, I'd be asking not only these questions, but what other attributes matter to your organization when making these decisions. And we'd be doing this for several applications, several services that we want to look at and figure out where we want to run them in the future.
All right, thank you, Pat. So again, great, information-rich slide. I recommend that you take a look at these when the webinar is over. Download them. We also have additional links that go into more detail. But again, this is a framework that is coming application on in, and that kind of brings me to this whole point, right? We've been talking about the applications and the attributes and the role of IT and making this catalog and building out a strategy, whether we want to re-platform, rewrite, or retire applications based on attributes. But it's more important, and for this audience, it may be more relevant also to talk about the various options, right? And talk about the various cloud options for running these applications. So Alan, I'll bring you into the conversation here. Can you walk the audience through this slide and talk through the various different options available?
Yeah. Hey, Sachin. Hi, everyone. Actually, I do want to take a step back real quick, Sachin, because I'm keeping an eye on the Q&A while I've been quiet here. And Sean asked a pretty good question, maybe for Pat, if you could take a step. When we were looking at the attribute slide or the key slide, back on slide 7, Sean asked Pat about security and compliance. Is this configurable or is it set to certain frameworks or standards like NIST and so forth? Is there a baseline? So what are your thoughts on that question before I cover my slide?
Yeah, so if we're talking about a third-party cloud or third-party service that's already canned, if you will, then we're probably talking about meeting certain baselines around NIST, around ISO, like you said. And typically, if you search their website or literally give them a call, they'll be able to tell you what frameworks or what standards their cloud meets. I think it's easiest if, and this isn't always the case, but I think it's easiest if a business can align their security needs, their compliance needs, regulatory needs to those frameworks, because then we've got a common language between the customer needs and the available cloud services that are out there to match those up. Otherwise, we're trying to match up the language that a cloud provider might be talking about to the regulatory needs and compliance needs that a customer may be talking about. And if that language isn't the same, then there's sometimes a lot of work that has to be done under the covers to figure out if those needs are met or not by a particular cloud provider.
Okay, great. Sean, hopefully that helped you out with your security questions. Thanks, Pat. So really understanding cloud choice, we've been talking about, figuring out what applications run where, and really the cloud piece doesn't have to be complicated. I like to kind of boil it down into three ways, really: private cloud, managed on site. You do most of the work by managing it. Can also be hosted. Of course, private cloud hosted by someone. And then there's the public cloud that we're all familiar with like the big guys, right? AWS. And then there's hybrid that I'll be talking a little bit more about in a second. So really 3 or 4. There's also multi-cloud that you might hear about, which is a combination of the hybrid cloud. But really the sum of this slide is that really brings it, I think, live, is that a recent survey of IT professionals showed that hybrid cloud, 85% actually chose hybrid cloud as really the ideal operating model, because it's a little of both, right? It gives you a lot of the security and so forth of on-prem with all the agility and so forth, that public cloud that we all know that it offers there. But really, it comes down to the applications and workloads and some of the formulas that Pat and Sachin have been talking about to figure out which ones run best where. So that's kind of how I take this slide and try and boil it down between private, hybrid, and public cloud, and even blending in some of the SaaS providers, right, like Salesforce and so forth, Salesforce.com and so forth. So that's kind of how I like to boil it down. So now here we have. I don't want to call it an eye chart, Sachin, but I think I'm going to hand this back to you and Pat to talk a little bit about cloud choices and attributes for some of the clouds that I just mentioned.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, Alan. So as we were talking about previously, like we were looking at this from an application perspective, right? Understanding how the attributes would emerge for the various different applications. And here we're actually doing the reverse exercise, where we're looking at all the various cloud choices, as you can see, and we're now looking at, what attributes do they fulfill from an application perspective, et cetera. And so what we'll do is we'll actually take an example and we'll walk through that example here. So in this scenario, well, let's take the example of a private cloud, right, that is managed by an organization themselves. So say you're an organization in the financial services sector, or say the energy sector, and you have your own cloud. What are some of the characteristics that you need to be paying attention to, and that the cloud can and should deliver, right? So from an application, function, and criticality perspective, again, a private cloud is ideal for a wide range of workloads, and it can deliver a wide range of SLAs. It's really a matter of setting up your cloud in that sense. And from a packaging and a lifecycle perspective, typically the workloads that you would run on a private cloud would be virtualized workloads. And now we also have some next generation IaaS workloads as well. And you're also looking at a faster upgrade cycle for these applications, right? It's not necessarily a waterfall model, because there is a inherent ability to handle faster upgrades through lifecycle tools, et cetera, part of a private cloud. From a performance and capacity perspective, again, you have the ability to handle very high performance and very high capacities, again, because this is something that, organizations, IT organizations have full control over on that front. But more importantly, you can also have low latency storage as a part of the mix as well, and low latency applications, like, for example, transactional workloads can be a part of that, right? So that is a good way to look at the attributes that can be delivered by these clouds. Similarly, from a resources perspective, because of the degree of control IT has, they can look at various options for compute, for storage, for networking, for GPUs, and more. So in this scenario, you essentially you can build it out with the best of breed hardware and look at essentially the latest and greatest, and also maintain generation of different hardware in the private cloud. Now, managing it is always an issue, and this is one of the areas that Alan will talk a little bit about later on. Now, one of the differences that you see is that people talk about utilization and growth, and Pat talked a little bit about this from an application point of view, and I'm going to kind of emphasize that, right? There is an element of utilization that has to be considered when you're looking at workloads. Is it frequently used? Is it predictable? Is it somewhat elastic and temporary in nature, right? Now, private clouds ideally can be used for predictable workloads, right? And in this case, predictability may be around not only the utilization of the workload, but also the performance growth and the performance characteristics in that sense. So it's not bursty in nature, mainly because, again, private clouds are more static in their configuration. But again, with the right infrastructure, it can scale, it can handle some of the elasticity in a pooled model. But for the most part, it is a predictable workload, oriented infrastructure choice there. Now, from a cost perspective, this is one where it can be, a low to mid CapEx centric model, right? It doesn't necessarily allow for OpEx centric model, although the newer choices by various different vendors allows for a mix of both CapEx and OpEx in that sense. And then we have a high degree of security because you can create parametric-centric security as well as network-centric security in a private cloud, right? So isolating it from the network and essentially also implementing within the actual private cloud east-west firewalls like microsegmentation, et cetera. So again, this is the characteristics here. And we're spending a little bit of time going through this because it's important to help you build this framework out so that you can understand and internalize it and look at all your cloud choices and create your own kind of matrix from that perspective. So let me pause here and see, Pat, if you have any comments you want to add to this.
No, I think that was covered very well, in my opinion. I don't have anything to add to it specifically, but we're definitely going to build on that as we go through this.
Hey, Sachin.
Indeed. So, yeah.
Hey, Sachin. I'm sitting here looking at it, and I'm thinking about like application XYZ. So, how would you suppose I'm an organization with 100 or 200 applications? I mean, do you initially start with the top 10 and just see where you are, and as you go through this and figure out where they might belong? How do you guys usually handle that? Or, when you have a lot to look at?
That's a great question. Matter of fact, Pat and I were just talking about this before the call. Let me bring Pat into this one to answer it. So, Pat, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. In fact, let's go ahead to the next slide, because I think I can answer it with the next information on the next slide as well. So yeah, where do you get started, or what do you get started with? Well, usually a customer has at least that in my experience, it has some drivers around why they're thinking about cloud. And so they have some ideas. Oh, this particular seasonality with this application is hard. I want to move it to the cloud. This application is highly critical, needs a very low RTO. I don't want to be responsible for that in-house. Can I do something in the cloud to address that? I need a self-service system for R&D to better support their DevOps environment more quickly. Is that something that a cloud would be more suited for example? So what are I guess the first question is, what are the business drivers that are generating this whole idea of going to cloud to begin with? And from there, can pick the applications that we want to look at the attributes of. Whether that be 10, whether that be 100, really depends on the organization. And we want to start easy typically. We want to start with some use cases that we think we can get some wins on, because if we can get some wins making our cloud choices, moving things to the cloud, of course, that makes it easy and helps build momentum to do other, perhaps potentially more difficult tasks, but potentially with more business value that can be driven from that. So if we have those attributes that I talked about on the slide, then we have the cloud choices, and really the attributes of those clouds that Sachin talked about, then we play matchmaker. Where do these line up? Where do we have strong alignment? Where do we have gaps? That also informs, what do I do first? If something aligns 90, 95, 100%, those application attributes and those cloud choices match up, then that cloud is probably a pretty good choice to move that application to. If only 60% or 40% match up, then that's probably not a good choice, and I either need to not worry about moving that application to the cloud right now, or I need to look at retooling the application so the attributes are different, or maybe I need to look at different cloud choices that would be more suitable to that application. So really looking at a traditional gap analysis here, what lines up, what doesn't, and some of this information you may have already. We looked at those application attributes. Some of them come right out of a business impact analysis, understanding criticality of the business, defining RTOs, RPOs that you might have already done to help build out a DR strategy. Some of that may have come out of a data classification exercise where you've classified the data for this, the data in this database has this level of security, needs to be more secure than this other data over here. If you've already done data classification for security or other reasons, maybe some of this work is already done. And then application classification. Some of the other things that maybe we haven't thought about that we need to think about now that we're thinking about cloud. One of the big ones that goes into this is application dependencies. If I pick up and move an application that's comprised of these VMs, and I move them to a different cloud, Am I breaking an application I've left behind? Does another application rely on the same database? Does another application rely on the same middleware? These are some of the most important questions when moving things to the cloud. And in my experience, they're some of the hardest to answer because they really require going to the app owner and asking the app owner to dig, because the app owner may not be able to answer these questions as well. And sometimes there's some remediation. If I really need to move this application to the cloud and the database VM happens to have data for another app, maybe I need to take that data out. Maybe I need to move that data and separate it before I move an application to the cloud. So those kinds of questions come up naturally when we're those kind of considerations come up naturally when we're asking these questions about application attributes and matching them up to cloud choices. And one other thing I want to mention here is that this can be used for a cloud-first strategy where someone is saying, I'm going to move everything to the cloud unless you can give me a good reason why not to. But this is better suited for an analysis to say it's not cloud-first. It's really what makes the most logical and business sense in terms of where my applications can run. And I think this is the term cloud smart, we're seeing more and more refer to making those smarter decisions as opposed to taking a cloud first decision. And Sachin, can you define cloud smart maybe a little more broadly than I have there?
Yeah, I absolutely can. And Pat, you brought up a really good point, and I want to emphasize this to the audience, right? We have not talked about technology so far. A lot of the discussion for this first half hour have been centered around best practices, soft skills, classification, collaboration with various teams. And these are important skills that any IT administrator, IT architect should have, right? So far, we haven't really gone into the technology of it. And in a way, Cloud Smart is kind of that same attribute, right? We have had a lot of conversations as an industry, as a market, as vendors, talking about cloud and cloud first. And that was a very straightforward point, right? Let's move all the workloads that can be moved into the cloud. But very quickly, we understood that there are some gaps around applications and workloads that cannot be moved to the cloud because of a mismatch of the attributes in that sense. So what we're saying and what we're defining as Cloud Smart is placing the applications, whether they're an individual application or groups of applications, on the right cloud by making that smart decision based on attributes and characteristics of the application and the various cloud choices that you have. So in a way, Cloud Smart is the culmination of the conversation we've had so far of matching up your applications based on their attributes to the various different cloud choices you have, whether it's around cost, performance, etc. All of those attributes come into play here. Okay, so with that, let me hand it over to Alan. So Alan, why don't you walk through kind of the Nutanix strategy? We've been talking about kind of general terms here. Do you want to jump to the Nutanix strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned a second ago, that the hybrid cloud was generally a platform that was favored by most IT professionals, right? I think 85% agreed that that's right. And why? It's, because it gives the combination, and in fact, the definition of what a hybrid cloud is it's a mix of on-prem, on-prem private cloud, even third party, combined with public cloud services. But the important piece is the orchestration between the two, right? And that orchestration and the integration of the control plane and the data planes is a key piece of creating a hybrid cloud. Because what happens when you don't have it, right? I mean, setting up a hybrid cloud can get complex. If you have an on-prem solution and then another group, maybe your sales team comes to you and say, hey, I'd like to roll out this application. It's going to be for 2 million customers. It's going to be seasonable, burstable, et cetera. It's like, well, how am I going to do that? Where am I going to put that? It probably makes sense in the public cloud. Do I have to set up another silo? Am I going to have another group over here managing that public cloud environment with my other group over here? So, and here's just an example of how complex, a hybrid cloud can be if you don't have the right platform, right? Things such as data locality, workload and license portability, latency, identity management, all that stuff. Things add up fast, and the complexity can really get problematic. And you really, really have to have the correct platform to get there, to make that cloud journey, and to make sure that when you're moving apps after you decide whether it's on-prem, private, or in the cloud, making sure you have that simple platform to make it easy, is the biggest step. So we can get you there in 4 steps. Nutanix itself can get you there in 4 steps in mapping your cloud journey. Modernizing, and here at Nutanix, we've been an HCI vendor in HCI for a long time. I think over 10 years at this point. We're a market leader in it. So for us, we believe making a transformation starts with making the move to HCI. The next step after that is move to IT as a service, start delivering services, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Then start integrating with the public cloud, and then unify it all. That's when things get really, really fun, when it starts to get unified on a single platform. So let's take a look at a little more at each of these. So phase 1, and I already talked about it, HCI, right? It's been around for many years. It's proven. Of course, we're the market leader. But there's some key things to keep in mind here. Make sure that HCI platform that you move to is a web scale architecture. The ability to deliver any application at any scale. Make sure it can expand, one node or server at a time, rack at a time. It's got to be simple, and it's got to be web scale. Intelligent operations, it's got to reduce IT workflows to a single click and simplify. A lot of that comes down to lifecycle management and automation. And it's got to be designed for resiliency. It's got to be always on, right? Fully distributed, a scale-out design, protect data against loss of a single disk and so forth. And the ability to upgrade that full stack with the zero disruption. So really the key things about modernizing and moving to HCI is phase 1. What's after that? Well, you've made the move to HCI. The next step is you start to deliver services on top of it. A lot of folks out there, they might have a legacy infrastructure, they might have HCI already, and I say, well, I have a private cloud. But when you really look at it and you look at some of the things and you ask questions like, are you delivering automation? Do you have an application marketplace, one that provides self-service to internal IT users while maintaining control of the resources and things of that nature? So it's taking that extra step and becoming a service provider and simplifying even more, right? Allowing IT to focus more on the business rather than spreadsheets and putting out fires. So it's adding IT as a service on top of your HCI. Phase 3. Phase 3 is when you start to enable a little bit more public cloud, right? And the key here is enable. And what I mean that is start to provision applications and being able to properly manage them. Start implementing a little cost governance on top of it with showback and chargeback across the clouds. Security, compliance auditing. Along with it, you can deliver desktops. We were talking about VDI and desktop as a service earlier, both from on-prem and in the cloud, but with a common broker and so forth. But start implementing and integrating the public clouds along with the previous 2 phases to start along your path. In phase 4, all right, this is when things start to get fun, right? I mentioned it earlier. You've made the move to HCI. You've started implementing IT as a service. You're using a little bit of public cloud. But, and I used the example before, what happens in 3 months when your developers come to you or your sales team comes to you and say, hey, we have a new application we'd like to roll out. And you consider, well, is it a good fit for public cloud? Those are your choices. You set up another silo to manage this new public cloud environment. There's more complications along with that. And that's where Nutanix platform really makes it easy. It's a single operating system that can span private, hosted, and public clouds. The result is operators can manage their traditional applications that live on-prem and modern applications that might be living in the cloud, but using a single platform. You really get the ability to seamlessly extend between clouds. And this is the key, right? Seamlessly extend, allowing administrators to move VMs, move applications without translation that Pat was talking about a second ago, without learning new practices or tooling. It's important. And finally, for true cloud unification, you get that you get license portability, which empowers you to choose the best cloud for each application without worrying about it. And this is really what Nutanix delivers. We deliver a true hybrid cloud platform. It's a complete solution that brings private, public, and hybrid together as one. It's an easy, intelligent, and resilient with a single control plane. It's a hybrid cloud easily delivered. It's the private, it's the public, and it's hybrid all together. And that's what Nutanix can deliver and make this entire journey simple. So with
Great.
that,
Thanks, Alan.
hey, sure, Sachin. I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks again. So we went through kind of the various different sections here. We wanted to actually keep a little more time for Q&A here. Now, Alan, I know you have tons of resources available as well, right? Do you want to walk through these resources for the team?
Yeah, we have a lot of great things. You mentioned earlier all the blogs on Nutanix.com to check out. I'd recommend these two. I believe you and Pat wrote them on Cloud Smart and application attributes, so make sure to check those out. We have a self-paced learning that you can do, and you can visit that on Nutanix.com. We have a new reference architecture down on number 4 that we just published. I think it's over in the handout section. That's another highly recommended reference architecture. So grab that one. But if you don't have time for any of these, if you can't do any of 4, do number 5. It's a Nutanix test drive, right? Where you can get in. There you go. Thanks. You can get in. You can set up a cluster yourself. You can set up VMs. You can see the lifecycle management. You can actually see how simple the Nutanix platform really is. So if you can't do any of the others, I recommend some of them. But if you can't do any of the others, please do the test drive so you can see how simple everything can really be.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So we talked a lot about the various different attributes, and you covered quite a few areas around Nutanix delivering the private, public, and hybrid cloud. So looks like it's time for Q&A, and we actually have quite a few questions, right? So let me ask the first question here. So there's a question that came in. Does Nutanix have any service providers that can deliver elastic capacity for my on-prem Nutanix cloud? And the answer is yes. We actually have quite a few service providers that deliver Nutanix as a service, and this could be for the purposes of running applications, like a replacement for a primary data center elastic capacity, if needed, which is more temporary in nature, or even disaster recovery. The quickest way to get to that information is go onto the Nutanix site and look for our service provider page. It's nutanix.com/x-powered. That's where you'll find that. There's another question here, and this one I think would be a good one for you, Pat. I heard about a Nutanix tool that allows us to provision various applications to various clouds, including AWS. Can you quickly explain what is that? So, Pat, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, that is our Calm product. Calm is a relatively lightweight lightweight tool that allows one to build blueprints to provision applications, provision data sources, provision other things in an automated format. It is unlike other, if anyone's used tools to try to do this in the past, you know that they can get rather large, rather cumbersome because they're built to do a lot of different things besides this. This is whereas there may be generalist tools out there. This is a very specific tool to do that provisioning, to do that application lifecycle management, which is what the ALM and COM actually stand for. it has numerous APIs and hooks to different hardware and also different software that one might want to work with. For example, ServiceNow, where one can use ServiceNow as a front end for a service catalog for end users. But on the back end, we can do the provisioning from an application standpoint based on simple, straightforward blueprints around that. So simple, light, and we'd love to quite frankly show you more about that if that's of interest.
Yeah, and I imagine, Alan, that this is available to test drive, so people can test drive COM and Nutanix through nutanix.com/test drive.
Yep, it's in there.
Yeah, great.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a follow-up question that came in as you were speaking. Is COM mutually exclusive with Ansible? And I can answer this, Pat, if you don't want to, or if you may allow me, I guess is a better way to say it.
Go for it.
So Ansible, yeah, so Ansible and other frameworks like Chef and Puppet are actually compatible with COM. So you can actually use Ansible to call COM or use COM to call Ansible, right? So you could create a blueprint in COM and then trigger it with Ansible, right? Because again, COM has essentially API calls that you can make, and these are RESTful API calls that you can make to essentially trigger that. Or you could go ahead and actually do the reverse as well on that front. All right, it looks like we're running a survey here.
Hey, Sachin.
Q&A.
Yeah. Hey, Sachin. I saw one from Brad that I'd like to answer, and he was asking about. It's funny, escaping from the cloud, and the expected results. What problems will it introduce? And it's so funny because we love public cloud, right? It delivers tons of benefits, especially with the hybrid cloud platform. You can take advantage of those with your HCI on-prem. And I want to tell a story because we had a customer that I spoke to a couple of months ago that they had. It was basically a medical company out in the Midwest. They got bought by a holding company, and I think there were about 100 companies under that umbrella. And the holding company themselves had a all cloud. You got to go cloud strategy. So when they got purchased, the CIO of the holding company said, "You got to go cloud. You got to go cloud," and they were trying to figure out how to do it. But in the end, to make a long story longer, basically after the analysis of setting up, HCI and getting Nutanix in-house to run and move applications back, in the end, because of the way the applications were set up, right? They weren't seasonal. They were kind of those predictable type of workloads. They were actually going to be able to save $2 or $3 million, over 2 or 3 years because they were moving applications back on site. So, and it just goes to emphasize what we've been talking about through this presentation, right? Take a look at the apps, do the analysis of where they belong, and it can, in the end, it can save you.
If I can just add a little bit to that,
yeah.
If you're looking if you want to make sure that you have a rip cord or an eject button as you're just dipping toe in the water, I would recommend using cloud services that are portable. What I mean by that is containers, VMs, things like that. If one starts using proprietary database services in a specific cloud, it's going to be hard to get all of that out and get all of that into something else that you can take off that particular cloud. So I would avoid the proprietary things until you have the confidence that this is the right cloud for you. And then you can start taking advantage of those, because there might be business services there that are actually better suited, but you don't want to jump in with both feet until you know that's the right cloud for you.
Yeah. Now, tactically speaking, sorry, I don't want to pile on another answer there, but I figured this is something that would also benefit Brad, is that if you were to go down this portable route, as Pat mentioned, Nutanix actually has a tool called Nutanix Move, M-O-V-E. And again, the purpose of this tool is to essentially facilitate to and from a motion or of moving a workload from AWS to Nutanix and back to AWS. So there is an inherent level of portability that you could design into your application, or you can ensure your application owners do maintain. And then once they do that, again, you can use something like Nutanix Move to move the workload and the associated data and basically leverage that in that front. Okay, so let me just quickly walk through it. So there is a survey that you probably see on your screen. What additional information would you like to have? So we will be sending out some of the resources that we mentioned here, but the choices are data sheet, technical white paper, case studies, pricing details, demos. Again, we can set up a demo and walk you through this, or if you'd like to try it yourself, we actually have the option of running test drive on that front. I know that a lot of you are also already customers as well, but if you're looking for additional information, feel free to, again, choose that. So we can definitely follow up there. We also have options that will help you kind of understand this framework as well, so we can follow up there. So just feel free to answer the question there. Going back to the Q&A, there's one question that came up, and this one is a good one for you, Pat. We're a fairly large organization with tons of applications, right? And it's not practical for us to go through this exercise application by application and make decisions on infrastructure choice. How do you recommend we handle a situation like this?
Sure. No, I get that exactly. It's if you got 1,000, 2,000 applications, going through each one with a fine-tooth comb can be difficult. The way I would approach a problem like that is to really start grouping applications. If there are transactional applications that rely on, I'm making this up, but you would find appropriate categories for your application catalog. Primarily transactional applications that rely on a SQL Server backend that are web-based, for example. Did I just describe 35 applications? If I did, I would take those and put them in a group. And rather than trying to figure out where each of the 1,000 or 2,000 applications go from a cloud perspective and playing matchmaker 2,000 times, I would start building out groups like that. Just like when you do data classification, for security reasons, we're not trying to create 1,000 different security policies. We're trying to create 3 or 5 or 8 or a small manageable number that's most appropriate. Same thing goes here. We're trying to create a limited number of categories that can go into a limited number of clouds. Sometimes we round up, sometimes we round down, so euphemistically, so to speak, in order to create categories and go with that. So, as I mentioned before, you start with the complexity of applications and services and simplify, and grouping simplifies and makes that manageable so that we can build a strategy around that.
And again, as always, we want to make sure that you take advantage of the resources here, and thank you all for attending. Lastly, I want to just make sure that you also take us for a test drive. It's nutanix.com/test-drive. And again, stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.